Hey everybody, welcome to the third RetroRGB Writers Podcast, and today we have a pretty full group of people here that I'm very happy to introduce to everybody. It's going to be kind of a fun, laid-back one, but I guess I would like to just start us off introducing ourselves. I'm obviously Bob, the founder of RetroRGB, and pass along to Vanessa, and we'll just pass the baton to everybody involved.
Hello. Yes, my name is Vanessa. I'm also known as Vanessa, and I help write articles and support everyone here at RetroRGB.com. Primarily focusing on such things as retro computers, among other things, but primarily retro computers, CRTs, anything that I can do to help support the overall site for RetroRGB.
You, Ronnie, want to go next? Picking them randomly.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rani. I've been a writer for RetroRGB since October 2018, and I'm a professional musician. At least I used to be before everything went to hell. So so yeah, I mostly write news articles about new products, new firmware updates, and yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Ray?
Oh, you broke up there. I didn't hear you.
Ray? On to you.
All right. So I'm Ray Command. I occasionally write articles for RetroRGB. Been doing so for a couple of years. Most of my articles are based around retro gaming and at a homebrew console stuff. Other than that, I'm a more general techie. You know, everything from cell phones to operating systems to, again, homebrew. And I love working with you guys.
Thanks, man. Danielle, the Girl Geek, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Danielle, also known as the Girl Geek Online. I write occasionally for the site, but mostly about very obscure things. In my free time, I fix stuff, and my day job is actually to design, engineer servers. So.
Nice. Dan, you technically have been a contributor to the site for a lot longer than you actually had an account, but would you like to give your intro as well?
Yeah, hey, I'm Dan. If you follow me online anyway, you probably know me as Elvis. Yeah, I've been chatting with Bob on and off for a couple of years now, I guess. We talk turkey through email and I think initially YouTube comments. I put a few things in there, but yeah, writing for the site since December, I think, maybe earlier. Don't know, but yeah, I like to concentrate mostly on either the hardware side of things or digital preservation, which is my real passion. That's what I do, sort of as a side thing when I'm not working on, my media stuff. I work in the VFX industry. I work for supercomputer companies, things like that, doing sort of big scale compute stuff. So it's nice to come home and do very small scale compute stuff. I like it.
Awesome. Alex, you're up next. This is actually the first time officially meeting Alex too. It was the same thing the first time Ronnie joined the Writers Podcast. So it's kind of funny that these things introduce all of you as well as each other to us to each other. But you're up, Alex.
I mean, it's a pleasure to meet everybody. My name's Alex Mitchell, going by Alex Mitchell on the website, obviously. I'm a freelance film technician through IATSE 669 and 212, so I work on union production from prestige television series down to small independent productions. I'm a retro game enthusiast, and I've just been contributing to the website for the last, I want to say 9 months, but it could be longer than that. And yeah, I just have a passion for the entire medium, and I'll just cover whatever kind of strikes my fancy. Like, for instance, reviewing controllers. I have a couple of those in the queue, but reviews are hard. I try to be as positive as possible, so sometimes it slows me down a bit.
Totally understandable. And our newest member, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris, known online as Chris Fratz, and my main job here is to make all of you people feel old, so mission accomplished. But in all seriousness, I personally love emulation a lot, even though I enjoy the hardware. Emulation and re-release is great, and I love it. And I think I remember that my first post was technically a guest submission that I sent back in October. with like a Word document for the Sonic hacking contest, and while I didn't accept your offer for the account to write for the site, then I'm glad that you still had that open a few months later.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is something that anybody that just enjoys this stuff could feel free to contribute any way they want. I mean, this site is supposed to be about everybody. That's why I always try really hard to make it a point to always be Bob from RetroRGB and never introduce myself that way, because it's always been about more people, which is always funny too, because even some of the trolls get that right, which is always really appreciative, because it's always like, all right, you're entitled to your opinion, but thanks for getting it right at least. So.
You know you've done it. You know you're doing the right. You're saying it correctly when the trolls don't call you RetroRGB.
Perfect. So this is just going to be an open freeform hangout just for everybody to get to know each other, you know, us and you. But I guess a good suggestion was to start out with what games we've all been playing lately. And mine's an easy one because I unfortunately don't have the time that I wish I did to play. So I've been forcing myself to by doing these really amazing live streams. Amazing for me. I'm not sure if I would call them amazing to watch, but the last games I played were my friend Audie Sorley dragged me through some of the worst 3DO games, all with a deadpan look on his face, making me wonder if the game I was about to play was actually good or if he was just going to torture
terrible.
me. Yeah,
I should link it. I should link you a review of Quarantine that I saw one time that was pretty positive about the game, but then slowly started going downhill as he went through the story.
I think I'm okay with the 3DO for a little while longer, but yeah, I guess anybody just want to talk about what game they've been playing lately, and you know, anything fun about that?
Yeah.
For me, go on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been putting the Retro Fighters Wireless Brawler 64 through its paces right now, and so one game that I had never really finished off completely was GoldenEye 007 for the N64, and you know, I just recently did the whole game 00 Agent and been going through and getting all of the cheat codes, and yeah, exactly, Chris. Yeah, it's an amazing game. I think it still holds up as long as you can get past its idiosyncrasies, and then the Wireless Brawler 64 has actually been an incredible way to experience it, because I feel like I'm not the only person here that hates the N64 controller. I know, hopefully that's not going to get anybody in any hot water here.
I agree with that sentiment with the control, and also I have one thing to say: Perfect Dark is better.
Well, I don't know. There's something about the simplicity. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to hog all the time.
No, that's cool. And I believe there was just that documentary about that Wrestling with Gaming posted that was pretty amazing. So
yeah,
I recommend really checking out that controller and the documentary if you're going to play the game.
And his whole channel, really.
Yep. Well, Chris, I guess you're up next. You're already in it.
Well, recently I have been doing a lot of concerts, so I haven't had much time for games, but one of the biggest gaming things that I played recently that's stuck in my mind is actually this game, but not this version. I played Myst, but not this version, which, yeah, I recently got a VR headset, so I decided to buy the Oculus Quest version of Myst. And playing the game in VR is friggin' amazing. It's like, one thing I love is when you solve the puzzles, it makes me feel smart. And it's like, it's a great version of the game. If you have a PC VR headset, it'll come to PC soon, and it'll have a 2D mode. So yeah, everybody can play the new remake coming out.
Awesome. Who's up next?
Should we go in alphabetical order like the window has us?
Is that how
it's
setting up? That's pretty funny.
I think at least for me, it comes up. Yeah,
yeah, it is.
Well, that's me, I guess. I've got 4 on the go at the moment because I can't ever commit to one thing because that's how I go. But so retro-wise, I've never played. This is my shame. I've never played a Final Fantasy game, so I decided to fix that. I'm starting with Final Fantasy 1 on Game Boy Advance. Getting through that, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like I played Final Fantasy 5 and 6 for about a couple of hours each as part of like a Let's Play thing for a forum, and really enjoyed those. So going back to 1, don't know if I'll do 2 and 3, but anyway, that's kind of fun. Playing another retro shame. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to recapture my childhood and like, you know, catch up with everything that I missed. So Monkey Island on PC, never ever played that. I played Sam & Max way back when. Really enjoyed that one. So going back playing Monkey Island at the moment, playing that actually on believe it or not, a Raspberry Pi through ScumVM on a CRT, which is heaps of fun. And then playing 2 indie games at the moment, playing Little Nightmares on PS4, which is really cool. I really love the aesthetic. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It's got the Got the
I
MIDI.
would.
Yeah, I can
I'd
only
love
emulate it.
I'd
Sad
love to get
face.
an SC55 and just hook that to my modern PC.
So good. Yeah, Little Nightmares on PS4, which is really cool. I love the aesthetic. I love the creepiness of it. It's pretty sad too, which is like I like that kind of emotional gaming. And then another kind of emotional one is a game called Fatum Batula, I think is how you pronounce it. So it's like a PlayStation 1 aesthetic 4:3 presented game written by this 20-year-old dude. It's really cool, really loving it. So that's kind of my 4 on the go at the moment.
Awesome. How
Over
about
to
you, Ronnie?
Ronnie.
Yeah, it's what I'm playing now is not necessarily retro. I've been revisiting the Xbox 360 a bit. I'm playing Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
Okay.
That's a super awesome game so far. I can't believe I skipped that like 10 years ago, I guess. And I've actually been revisiting the PS2 library for a while. I tried Devil May Cry. I never played the series ever. And when I came back to revisit the PS2, I noticed there's a new version of OPL. It's been 5 years since we got the last version, and I'm writing about that now. So yeah, look out for that in the next few days.
Awesome.
Ronnie, quick question with your PS2 library. Are you running predominantly PAL or NTSC in that region?
I have a PAL PS2, but I'm running NTSC games.
Yeah, I do the same.
You know what's funny is isn't the 360 considered retro these days? Some people say yes, some people say no.
Oh, I mean that's we were kind of
That's a
getting
can
into
of
that in the
worms.
writers Discord. I feel like that would be a good topic to discuss once we got the whole once we got everyone's recent plays. But yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's the next topic. Let's go through and talk about these games a little bit more, and then go back to that.
Awesome. So I've been kind of flipping back and forth between the Saturn and the Neo Geo because I have a Fenrir, and there's been all these translation hacks coming out for the Saturn. And then for the Neo Geo, I just got the Neo Geo SD loader from Furtek, which is amazing. That just brings that system right back to life. So I've been going back and forth between Saturn RPGs, Grandia, Lunar, I just finished recently, and KOF on the Neo Geo. And of course, some of the shooters like Polestar, which I keep getting destroyed, but hey, what can you do? You just keep playing until you eventually beat it.
Ray, are you using the is it like the MPEG card version of Lunar, or what are you playing for Lunar?
Just a standard version. They are working on the MPEG version as well. They're pretty much in parity right now, but they improved FMV on the original enough so that you don't really need to stress the MPEG version if you don't have it. You don't have to spend a ton of money.
They re-encoded the videos?
Yes.
Wow.
From scratch.
Jesus.
So what they did was Trekkie Unites 118 with the guy who's primarily working on the project. He grabbed the video from the PSP, which is a lot cleaner, and he re-encoded it and inserted it into the Saturn version. It's some pretty nice.
That's
and
an
it's actually
project.
higher.
Holy crow!
It's awesome, and he's actually higher res in the PS1 version now.
And one thing about Grandia is I need to play through that again because I got the HD remaster for PC, but there's a way you can actually get the unfiltered sprites and textures back by just ripping out the files for the filtered graphics, and it works pretty well. But I get weird flickering artifacts on certain surfaces and in the air. So yeah.
Unfortunately, that's only for the PC version, right? You can't do it for the Switch or anything else that it may be available for.
I'm sure if you had your Switch homebrewed with a file browser, you could probably do it, but only the PC version, as far as I know.
Got it.
Still not perfect though, because it has graphical artifacts, and it's also the PS1 version. If you care about that.
Well, I forgot. I played the mysteriously missing for many years Paprium. And I'll leave it at that.
Please.
On that note, Danielle, you're up.
So I've been playing. I bought some controllers, some specialized controllers for Groove Coaster and for Sound Voltex. If anyone's into rhythm games, so I've been playing Unnamed Sound Voltex Clone and Groove Coaster on the Switch with like a giant controller that's exactly like the arcade. For non-rhythm games, I've been playing a lot of Fortnite, which later on when all my friends see this, they'll be like, yep, yes, she has. Because we get together and I play with my friends and one of my friends' kids who could kick all of our butts. And then for retro games, I've been playing Akumajo Dracula on my X68K with my MT32.
Rub it in, why don't you?
So cool.
Do you want to
So
see Rub It In?
Jealous.
Oh, that's
wow.
beautiful.
Nice.
Oh,
The Manhattan skyline.
damn,
Nice
damn,
piece of
damn,
kit.
damn. Whenever I hear Manhattan Skyline, I just think of the song by Aha.
Yeah, say what you will about the Mister, but that X68000 case is just incredible. Oh, what a beautiful piece of hardware.
It's my
100%
most
agree.
prized possession for gaming.
Don't you also have the monitor to match?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to hold that up. To
Oh,
the
wow.
camera.
No, that's another room. I'm actually, when we first started, you guys were like, oh, you have such a nice setup. This is my bedroom. This is my bedroom. I have no room.
I was also gonna say my favorite, like just computer hardware in terms of the design of the case, is the Next Cube. The Next Cube looks freaking cool.
Yeah.
Think about that one.
All right, Vanessa, what have you been playing?
Well, I've been playing a number of things. As you can see right behind me, I got the Super Famicom recently, so I've been super excited. It's a one chip 01. I actually thought it was a one chip 02 by the serial number, but it's actually an 01. So I'm super excited. I can't help it. I'm sorry. I absolutely love the Super Nintendo. It's one of my favorite consoles of all time. And to actually own the Super Famicom, which I've always wanted, is just absolutely cool. And I need to get one thing. I got props. One sec.
I had a Super Famicom once, and then it kept breaking, and it was the video circuit. And every time I fixed it, I would leave it on my shelf, and I would come back 3 months later, and I would use it for a video, and it wouldn't work, and I'd have my whole apartment covered in stuff, and I had to stop what I was doing to fix it, and I lost my mind one day, and I texted Jose. I was like, dude, you want a free fucking Super Famicom? Because I don't ever want to see this thing again for the rest of my life. He's like, sure, bring it over.
I wouldn't mind getting a Super Famicom also because I prefer how that looks to the US SNES.
Well, I've got a PAL Super Nintendo and a Super Famicom side by side, and literally the logo's what differentiates them. Like they're identical.
Which confuses me about the US redesign even more.
Yeah, no offense, guys. Yours is really ugly.
Oh god, it's so bad. Yeah.
As someone who was born in 2000, I agree.
I loved it, but I grew up with it, so.
I was
You
about to
grew
say
up
it was
with
my
it.
first console, so to me it's all just pure. It's like it's my baby. So
I called Stockholm syndrome.
I'm super curious. What are these props, Vanessa? You're really setting the scene for us here.
I know, right?
So, in addition to getting the Super Famicom, I've decided that I want to do complete in box Super Famicom games. So, I've started RetroRGB got me started on a couple copies of Final Fantasy. Of course, I had to get 6 and 5. I've got 4 coming.
Mm-hmm.
But recently, I've gotten more in. So I've been really going to town on some of the early, well, not necessarily early, but I mean, Star Fox is not early, but
still looks good though.
Oh
Is
my
there a
gosh,
Super Metroid in there?
Oh, beautiful.
She's saving that for last, probably.
So I've been going through and just going after complete in box Super Famicom because I'm sorry, like this just kicks the pants off the freaking Super Nintendo as far as box art and everything goes. Like there's no comparison.
Mhm.
Yeah, North America always kind of gets hosed out of the.
Oh, there it is.
There
box
it
art.
There
Oh,
they
yeah.
go.
Yeah, save it for
Absolutely.
last.
To be fair, when it comes to the SNES, the America got beaten up and got the short end of the stick. You guys got the worst looking console, the not as colorful looking controller.
Yeah, but
Although
at
I
least
will
our
Lots of
controller cables
uniform.
were more than 3 inches long. So
Yeah.
That's the one thing you got.
It
And
was a weird time, though. Like,
concave
there was
buttons are superior. I'm just gonna put it out there. I
Agreed.
love the Famicom coloring, but I do love those little dimples on XY.
There was a
Agreed.
reason I bought the 8-bit though SF30 Pro instead of the SN30 Pro, and it's the colors.
But yeah, that was a real weird time, right? That was like Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan had that real, Japanese stuff. No one in America would like it, quote unquote. So they had to localize everything, change everything, remove all the Japanese-ness from everything. And then same sort of thing was happening with Sega or Sega. Sorry, Australian pronunciation, terrible. At the time where they were falling apart because of fighting between the two sides, right? So yeah, real weird
Well,
time in gaming.
Wait, sorry, I want to loop
It's
back.
crazy.
Do you say it's Sega?
Yeah, sorry,
Is that
it's a terrible Australian thing. We all say Sega instead of Sega.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I
And
wasn't.
I
I was like,
acknowledge, I acknowledge that it's wrong, but I say it anyway. I'll say it 100 times.
Well, I was
Old
gonna
habits die
say,
hard.
with like the Nintendo versus the Famicom, once you got to the second version of the Famicom, it's the same as the second version of the NES.
Yeah, the top
It's just
loader.
a little bit taller to make
And-
sure that our gigantic cartridges didn't flop. So dumb.
Huge cartridges, yeah.
Those are why were they so stupidly huge?
Because
they
they're
had to look-
supposed to look very like a VHS
A
tape.
VCR.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true. Yeah, because
wanted
they
the
wanted to do the
VHS look.
push down function.
So Vanessa, I have to
worked.
ask one question though. You said that by serial number, the Super Famicom also has one chip.
Yeah, so there's the Super Nintendo database, and when I was looking, I was in the 25 million or 22 point. I was in SN25, 00, etc. And I was looking at the serial numbers, and mine was 80,000 from the first listed O2 chip. So when I got it and opened up, it was an 01. So it's like, I was super close to 02 looking at the serial numbers. So I know in between mine and about 80,000 after that, somewhere in there is the transition from 01 to 02.
So, did anybody ever determine what the differences actually were? Because I spent 4 hours on a stream with Voltar years ago, testing so many different revisions, and I probably, without exaggerating, have had at least 30 come through my office, apartment, whatever else to test over the years, and we found that the differences were far greater just between basic tolerances of components, because resistors were probably 5% tolerance back then, and we nerds nowadays would use 1% tolerance, but you could have 4 one-chip -01s that would all perform differently. So it's not necessarily, and by the way, when I say perform differently, I mean have a completely tweaked capture and zoom in 1,000%. I don't mean your average person could see it on a CRT and understand the difference, but I still was curious why they made that definition between the models. No one ever heard any other info on that, or?
I have no clue.
haven't.
I looked at your photos between the 01 and 02, and the thing that I honed in on was Link's cap is like orange. It's like more orange on the 02, where on the 01 it's like orange and then tapers off to dark.
So that absolutely explain, or it could be explained by the resistor tolerance difference between the red, green, and blue levels. How it, it's. I think if anybody ever had the patience, which I do not, but if anybody had the patience of taking all 3 revisions and replacing all of the surface mount components and on the video circuit with 1% tolerance resistors and 5% tolerance capacitors, you could get all of them to look identical. Unless the chips themselves have a high tolerance, but I don't really think so. Those Nintendo's version of the Sony CXA encoder, those were pretty decent. They weren't hugely different, in a run. So
I'm interested to see like MD Fourier outputs as well. See what the audio's like, because I think it'll suffer the same thing.
I totally agree. Yeah, I wish
I'm
there
also
was
curious.
software
Isn't
like
that kind of what? Oh, go ahead, guys.
I'm also curious, is Voltar still working on the 2-chip solution?
I mean, Voltar's working on a lot of stuff. I think I have like $2,000 worth of equipment lost in his garage from 4 years ago. But there is somebody else working on that who may actually finish it. And believe it or not, the board was sent to me like 6 months ago. It got more than that. It got lost in shipping, then it got found in shipping, and then we had scheduled, we meaning Jose and I, scheduled time to install it, because while I can do most of these mods, the problem I have is once I make a mistake, that's past my skill level. If you break a trace, if you have to replace a component. So I would bring it to Jose anyway, and now I'm wasting a lot more of his time than if he just did the mod in the first place. So when I say we do this together, I really mean he does it, and that I just kind of do the documentation around it. So I don't know where we're at with that, but we have a Super Nintendo, we have the boards, and we're ready to test. And there's two kinds. There's one to make it super quick. There's the right way to do it, and a way to do it that might work and might not, depending on the game and the console. So we're obviously testing the right mod for it. Not, no offense, but we're not wasting our time on something that it will always be a dice roll depending on which model revision you have. So yeah,
Well,
I don't know where we're at with that.
I don't want to spoil anything, but does that have anything to do with like the digital video signals that people have discovered on the Super NES motherboard? Because I remember seeing something on Shmups about Black Dog Tech maybe having a solution for that in the future, or I guess Pixel FF now. Or,
yeah. So the only reason I'm talking about this is because it's already on a forum. But basically, the person who discovered this stuff tapped into the digital video signals, and it's a digital to analog conversion, which mixed in with other stuff gets you a very high quality RGB output that's on par with the one chip solutions on one model, at least, probably more, but at the moment, one model motherboard. And then Dan and crew speculated like, hey, we're doing a million other things now, but we might be able to take those digital signals with that, depending on a million other things. And as far as I know, they haven't actually sat down and done it yet. And there are a few hurdles they'd have to get over. But I mean, if there was ever a team that could get over them, it's now Dan, Christoph, and Woozle. So it's 3 very awesome human beings that I'm very happy to see working with each other.
Maybe they could find a way to tackle X-Band support in what.
Actually, I know there's a team of people working to revive X-Band.
Yeah, and that they're getting pretty far with that, and there's also a few other projects in different stages of completion that are doing that and stuff like that to integrate it all together. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on as well, but a lot of it is proof of concept. And respectfully, I honestly mean this in a nice way, but it's a lot of times developers get 50% into a project and they have it working and they're really excited and they show it off, and then they don't realize that the next 50% of making it into a manufacturable and installable product is actually almost impossible. So I don't know if, I'm using that as products as an example, but for these proof of concept net plays, I'm not sure how far they're going to go with them, but I hope it's possible, because having a very low latency 2-player retro solution is pretty awesome. And the only thing that's worked to pro level at this point is using Cloud Parsec. So they have retro emulation running on an Amazon server, which they rent for a lot of money an hour. And then both remote parties connect to the server. So it's no one competitor has the advantage. They're both connecting, to a cloud server, and they were able to pull that off. And the players themselves said it was mostly fine. And to the point where the times they did notice anything, that could have been anything. That could have been them live at a tournament and somebody bumping into them, like my dumbass actually did at a tournament once. So like, the amount of actual interference was on par with what a live event might have been like anyway. That's the most impressive I've seen.
So basically, in the interviews, the guy was just going, "It was that son of a gun who bumped into me, I swear."
He won the match. I apologized. I apologized afterwards, and then apologized after the tournament was over. And the dude pretty much looked at me like, you know how many people run into me a night? Like, shut up. Like, no one cares. Like, so I still felt like a total moron, though.
I know the feeling of being feeling like an idiot.
All right, so I think it's a good time to start this conversation because I think we all have a pretty good opinion, and we all come from different expertises in the video game world, and
and some different time periods.
Yeah, and it's those things never matter, and when it comes to opinions like this, though. So age and stuff like that doesn't mean shit. Obviously, mean that respectfully.
Sure.
But what do you all think defines when a console becomes retro? And there's obviously going to be caveats to that. So, for a while there, it was anything that didn't have an HDMI port is retro. But now that the PlayStation 3 store is shutting down, does that mean that's now retro as well because you can't buy the games anymore? So what's anybody's thoughts on that? Who has the strongest opinion that they'd like to share, I guess?
I think Oh yeah. I think it's tough because we want to divorce like the emotional response of like, holy shit, this thing that I played in university is like retro now versus like what we would define sort of as like a, like if we dug down through the sediment, like what counts as like retro at this point. And I think like maybe a good rule of thumb is like if something is 2 generations old or if it's at the very least 15 years old, then that would probably constitute something retro, and I mean in this case it's like one of the things that's a bit of an outlier is like the Wii is so close to the GameCube in a lot of ways. Like, does the Wii kind of also straddle that same retro part of the industry that the GameCube does? I think that's a personal decision, but yeah, I feel like 15 years or 2 console generations at least is probably like where my cutoff is.
I agree with ladies first.
I'm at 2 generations back too. That's actually like in my head, it's 2 generations. The only other thing is I can't remember how long the PS2 was actually manufactured, but that's another thing is manufacture date. When was the last one actually produced? So for me, it wouldn't even necessarily be like 15 years, but maybe 10 years after the last one was done being made, if it's not 2 generations back.
Well, that's an interesting question too, because I mean, you think about like the Famicom disk system and how long Nintendo was making parts to repair the drive belts and everything like that. Like that console was supported almost until the 21st century, wasn't it? Like maybe it was like early 2000s they stopped selling parts for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they stopped because they just couldn't get any more parts or something like that, if I remember correctly. Like I think it was the materials to make them just dried up eventually. Or I could be wrong on that though.
But yeah, it's kind of weird that PS3 would be considered, like in my head, it's kind of like what you said, Alex. Like, yes, I was in college or I was in high school when this was released. That's not retro. I'm not that old.
Well, I am old, and I played PlayStation 1 through university. So, yeah, it's been an acceptance thing that I've had to get to myself, I think, over the last couple of years. But I play part-time mod on a big Australian forum, and we've got a similar question came up a few years back, which was how do we define retro and how do we keep things? It's a PC-centric forum, so it was like how do we keep our topics here and the newer topics there. And I wrote this in the writers' channel, but the gist was that the forum's full of slightly younger people, so I'm quite old on that forum when most people are sort of in their 20s. So, the idea that 15 or 20 years ago was retro was quite literally when people were infants. So people do want a nostalgic hit, I guess, when they talk about retro. It's a big part of it. The other thing is it's PC-centric, so you can't, 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, it doesn't make any sense on a PC-centric forum.
I guess you could say, like, if it was released during the age of Shutter, Vista, or, something like that.
Yeah, but, I mean, even then, right, like, there's such a broad range of stuff, and there's so many generations of things, and then, like, it depends on how you define it, too. Like, the i7 chip, for example, is older than 10 years, but there's different families within that. So it's really hard to pick things. So because it's just there's so many people and so many different diverse tastes and everything, and because it's a younger forum, we decided to go with 10 years as the retro marker, and totally arbitrary. There was no great positive or negative reason for it. It was the least dumb reason, basically.
Honest,
And that's worked really well. One of the big things, though, is that for me, preservation of games as art and games as culture is a big part of why I do this whole hobby. And I found also that games that are 10 years old, nobody talks about, right? Like retro stuff is popular because it's on eBay fetching a fortune and suddenly everybody knows about it, or there's a million YouTube channels talking about the NES or whatever.
yeah.
But who talks about 10-year-old PC games? Who talks about 10-year-old anything games? They're just kind of lost, right? Yeah,
People barely talk about Portal 2 nowadays, as an example, and that came out in 2011.
But even like PlayStation 3 had a huge library that nobody talks about. There's a lot of really obscure, weird stuff on there too, like not just the mainstream stuff. We're starting to pick this up on PlayStation 2 and Wii. Like I've got my whole Wii shelf here is all full of really weird stuff. But yeah, there is sort of I guess new retro that's just kind of forgotten, and it'd be a shame to lose focus on that now rather than waiting until it's all rare and nobody can find it and it's really expensive.
I feel like we should preserve this stuff while it's easily accessible.
Agreed.
Like as soon as a console gets hacked, dump whatever games you own onto like a backup server or something.
Yeah. Age limits. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Danielle.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's also part of partly generational, but, age thing. I mean, right now, you have a lot of people who are talking, we talk fondly about, 5th generation, 6th generation. As younger gamers get older, they're going to talk about those Wii games. They're going to talk about those obscure PS3 games. They just have not gotten old enough yet to get on YouTube and talk to them and become popular about it. I think it's all cyclical. 10 or so years ago, everyone was talking about Atari and talking about C64. And, now we're moving on to, the big right now is the 6th gen. And, now starting to talk a little bit about the 360, but I mean, you look at GameCube prices and GameCube prices are insane. PS2 is creeping up. People are talking about the OG Xbox thanks to HDMI mods, but also Microsoft supporting with the Series X and increasing the backwards compatibility of taking those OG games, putting it in your Series X and getting all these good enhancements.
And also making sure those games are put on the marketplace so that if you don't have the physical copy, you could just buy a digital version of that game and enjoy it.
So, I think it's all cyclical. As the younger gamers get older, they're going to look at their nostalgia for things that they consider retro, and we'll start getting on YouTube and, we'll hopefully come to RetroRGB and add some quality content to the site.
I definitely agree in the cyclical comment. One of the other forums I'm on is an arcade collecting community, and most of the members there, I think, would be somewhere between 50 and 70 years of age. So they're really looking at the electromechanical stuff and the physical stuff, right? That's their sort of view of what modern gaming of their teenagehood was. So yeah, if you ask them about retro, they're like, "Oh, it's 30 years old," or that's their kind of line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have that same thing in pinball too. You actually say electromechanical, early solid state, and now it's like LCD because now they just have giant LCDs in them. So it's kind of funny when you're like, okay, which one of this era do you guys like?
Yeah, it's funny too, because you all bring up a very good point of there's a difference between your personal sense of what retro is and what the individual product itself might be classified as. So anybody who grew up with something between 8 and 15 years old, when they hit 30 years old, that's retro to them. But if you look at it in the case of PCs, if it can run on Windows 10, is it retro, even if it's 20 years old? Or, if it runs on DOS, it's definitely retro. And, there's so many different little niches that you could put this into. And with console gaming, analog only support is definitely in there, which would technically include the 360 because it did not originally ship with an HDMI port.
AV out only.
And that's why there's always going to be mods available for all of these consoles, because I guarantee you at some point somebody's going to come out with an HDMI mod for the first generation 360s. So.
If they survive that long, holy shit. I mean,
Yeah.
my old Elite console just red ringed like a couple of weeks ago. I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did.
One thing I'm gonna say about like just PC games is one way I would probably classify it as just what was the major version of Windows that was used when the game came out. Like that's how I would sort of chunk it up.
Even
So,
then,
like-
there's games that can do either, right? Like there's games out there that
Yeah,
say
there's like
2000
Crisis.
or XP. Yeah.
Crisis was XP, but also had DX10 and Vista, like and extra stuff. But Vista was the main operating system being pushed, so I would
Yeah.
classify that as Vista era.
Yeah, because the only problem is XP stayed for forever and is still, I think, possibly still exported, like
People
supported
still-
by Microsoft's like extended packages.
I think
Yeah,
that
their
and I
embedded
think
series. That's
think-
when the
think
anything that's in
the-
their embedded line is minimum 10 years, but they usually support it for far after that, because that was one of the things in one of my previous companies was programming stuff for Windows Embedded. And kiosks, ATM machines, the craziest things you could imagine have that. And their Vista and 7 embedded. The 7 embedded was actually really good, but the XP you had to be a programmer to do that. So companies would spend a ton of money to have custom images built. And so that's one of the many reasons why that stuff is still being used.
Rainey
Yeah,
and Ray, what are your folks' thoughts on the retro conversation?
Want to go first, Rainey?
Well, sure. For me, it's about the games. I mean, ask me 5 years ago, I would tell you anything prior to the Dreamcast is retro. But ever since stuff like the Virtual Console and Xbox Live and stuff like that, I mean, the flux of indie games that we have now on modern consoles, the line between retro and modern becomes a little bit blurry for me, because it's like I said, it's about the games more than about the actual hardware. I mean, you could play an 8-bit style game now on a 4K console, so it doesn't make any difference to me.
Kind of like synthwave music.
Yep.
And like in my case, there's really no blanket term that covers everything. It's no matter how hard you try, you'll never encompass all consoles and computers into retro, classic, or modern. For me, if it needs an external device or a mod to connect to a current TV, it's retro.
Well, I mean,
a lot of TVs don't even come with anything but HDMI ports these days.
I was gonna say technically some TVs still have composites, so should that count?
A few,
even
but
if the picture is crap when you blow it up on there.
Exactly, but again, nothing would no matter what term you use, what terminology you use, it's never going to encompass everything. For example, let's take the GameCube. The original model came with HDMI out. The Wii does not have HDMI out.
Oh,
the digital, unless you mod it.
Yeah.
You mean the digital ports?
Digital, yes. So yes, you have the digital port on the original GameCube, which you can get like an Insurrection Carby and plug it into your TV digitally. And then the second model of the GameCube got rid of that port, but the first one had it. And the Wii didn't have it at all. You have to mod the Wii in order to get HDMI out. It all depends on that, and also it kind of depends on age. As somebody who works for a school district and sees kids going from pre-K to graduate, what they see as a classic or a retro game is going to be much different than what we all see.
Yep.
Somebody who was born when
exactly.
the PS3 came out now is 15 years old. So what's classic to them? What's retro to them?
I'm
I asked my son.
Oops, sorry, we all hit it at the same time. Somebody else go.
I've got teenage kids, and I asked my son, his impression of retro. The same sort of conversation, trying to get that, younger approach to it. And for him, it really is that nostalgic hit of he played so much Wii when he was younger. So that to him is his, his NES basically.
Well, I also laugh because my brother's only 4 years younger than me, and my console was that Super Nintendo, but his was the PS1. So my mom's was the Odyssey 2. So
Great system.
So for this gen, it's
And-
probably going to be their iPad 2, and
For me,
Whatever.
technically, my first console that I had was a wide GBA that I had a bunch of like movie tie-in games and shovelware, I think.
Actually,
And
what was everybody's first console in the chat?
It's like the first console I had was the GBA, and I only came with a copy of the Jungle Book for the original Game Boy. And like a delinquent little kid, I stretched the image like a little delinquent. My first home console was the Wii, though. So
my mom's an I'll call her an OG gamer. We had an NES growing up, but that was like the family console. But mine was Super Nintendo. That was actually I got it as a gift with Mario Paint.
that must have been a nice bundle.
I got one that I don't know if anybody's heard of this one. It's the Calico Gemini.
Is that the triangle one?
No, that's the TriStar.
That's the TriStar.
Yeah. No, it's basically a Atari 2600 clone. They came with a controller that both had the stick like an Atari did, and it also had a paddle underneath it. So it's
Honestly, when I hear Calico and Atari in the same sense, I just think of the add-on for the Calico
Module.
Vision that just lets you play 2600 games.
yeah. One day when you're really bored, just look up a Calico Gemini, and you may learn something new.
Ronnie, Dan, what were your two first consoles? Because it's in the U.S. is geographically huge, right? So somebody in California's first console in the 80s would definitely be different than somebody on the East Coast console. But when you start to get to different countries and everything else, and that's
gets
when you start,
interesting.
it starts to be pretty cool because there's a lot of different revisions of stuff that I never saw growing up. So what was you two's?
Why don't you go?
Okay. So my brothers had the Atari 2600, obviously in the 80s. But when the Civil War has ended here, that was in 1990. We opened up to the world, and my cousin actually got a Sega Master System, and I loved that because there was a port of Double Dragon on it, and it was so perfect to me.
Such
So
a
I
good port.
asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I asked my parent for a Master System, and they agreed. They said, "Yeah, okay." And we went to the store, and they asked the guy for a Master System, and it was like, "We don't have that. We have a Mega Drive." And I said, "No, I don't want that. I want a Master System." Yeah, I ended up with a Mega Drive, and I loved it, and I still do.
What an
Okay.
excellent mistake. That's the greatest letdown in the history of letdowns. Oh no, I have to upgrade to their 16-bit
no.
version.
Oh no, I got the better version. Wow.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
Oh man, they get FM sound now.
Well, I mean, hey, you know what? At least you probably could have gotten the power base converter at some point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I just want to give a shout out to all the PC gamers because my parents didn't let me get a video game console, but my dad was an engineer and we had my uncle worked at Dell, and so back then he got us a really nice 486 33 megahertz. It had like the shittiest hard drive and just ran everything in MS-DOS. So just being able to boot stuff up in command line was how I started. And God, I still think back to like Betrayal at Krondor and Commander Keen and like early Doom stuff. And so I feel like for a lot of people, their first console is going to be a PC, and that was definitely my childhood growing up too.
I'm trying to find one of the earliest actual PC games I had, which I couldn't find. It was the first, so this is like the second one I have. This friggin' meme of a game. I do not remember if this was good or not. But
It
yeah,
was not.
before I had just consoles, I also had just PC games.
Yeah, I think I still have my copy of King's Quest on 5.5-inch floppy around here somewhere. But
Oh yeah, technically my first console was a Tandy 1000 with no hard drive, so you had to boot to floppy every time. And King's Quest was one of the games I used to play, and Zaxxon, which I don't think I ever even beat the first level. Weird. I liked the game, but what a weird one. Then my dad was tired of me being on his computer, so I got a TRS-80. Then a few years later, I got a Nintendo, just the front-loading NES. But yeah, technically, I basically learned to read on the Tandy 1000.
yeah,
I imagine,
it's like shocking
Dan,
how
yours
many of
had
those
to have
games
been
were-
some kind of computer before it was a console, right?
Yeah, well, quite a weird one. So my very, very first gaming system was, and I'm apologize, I'm going to say Sega a million times. It was a Sega SC3000, which was basically the SG1000 that got turned into a home PC, and it had. Yeah, most of the games came on audio tape, and it was just standard audio that the hardware would then interpret from the waveform. So it wasn't like anything special or encoded. You could just bang any old tape player in the back of it, and copy games that way as well. Some games had some weird copy protection where they put the audio out of phase, but you could do a little peek poke command and get past that. It was pretty cool. But yeah, that's most of my preservation work that I do personally is based on that console. So my website, stickfreaks.com, I put up tape dumps there. There's a group in New Zealand. So that console, I guess, bit of a backstory. Nintendo just didn't have the foothold here that it did in North America, right? So like Sega, there you go, say it again, was everywhere here. As a kid, like everything I had was Sega up to the Super Nintendo. So yeah, it was massive here, and that was the brand that was everywhere. They had Australian offices here. They had you could ring them up and get help with games on a phone line. Much I think Nintendo had the same thing in North America.
Nintendo Power
so
the hotline, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of prominent YouTubers here in Australia who are all ex Sega Hotline staff members, and they talk frequently about their times back in those days, which is pretty cool.
Can you just-
Since Spacey's, sorry.
Can you talk briefly about like what the solutions are for getting those those audio files into like a Mister and a Raspberry Pi? Because I feel like I've seen those modules before, but I don't really understand exactly how that works. You have to like play back the audio file and then over like 1/8-inch TRS like feed it into like a Raspberry Pi or like a Mister to actually use those cores with those audio files, or how does that work?
Depends on the system. Like I know that there's been a lot of work on the Commodore 64 for them to come up with a tape format where they basically changed and they've started doing it on the Sega SC3000 as well. They go from an audio thing because the audio is encoded, right? So I think it's 1200 hertz and 2400 hertz pulses. So then you can just represent them as something else and turn it into a very, very tiny little file instead. But certainly for the SC3000, there's nothing in Mister yet. I've been meaning to do a request for enhancements to somebody to see if we can get the audio format in, but it's definitely in like all the major Sega emulators. So Mecha's got it, MAME and all the MAME offshoots have got it, and for those ones you can just literally point it to a WAV file and it'll read the WAV file, which is really cool. So yeah, all the stuff on my side are just they're raw WAV files, but because there's a site, sc3000survivors.com. They did a whole bunch of work on getting this bitstream sorted out, and so you can pull in an analog audio tape file into your SC3000, then re-export it as a perfect square wave, and then that compresses down really well because there's it's just digital information basically encoded in audio. So the WAV files are pretty tiny. They come out at like bytes sometimes, which is crazy.
Oh.
Yeah. But anyway, that was my first system. So that was a long time ago. But yeah, Bob, definitely a computer-ish, console-ish thing is what it was.
You know, in
Yeah,
the 90s, for a small period of time, I felt that like console gamers were the master race, at least in the very early 90s.
Definitely.
Until probably Doom came out on the PC, and I was like, damn, okay.
My, how times have changed.
That's funny.
Yeah, and I was
Absolutely.
also going to add to the, what is retro kind of tail end of that. You look at countries like Brazil. In Brazil, they still have Master Systems being sold there
Yeah.
currently. So it also would have to go to what country or region you're from and what they are offering there, because I'm sure a Brazilian's perspective would be a lot different than someone here in North America.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of finishing up my, I know I've been working on this for almost as long as this stupid wiki, but I'm finishing up the scripts on the Getting Started series. And a point that I make, and by the way, I mean this respectfully, all the points we talked about here were valid and I enjoyed all of them, but the point that I strongly make is that it doesn't matter in the slightest bit, because video games are exactly like art and music, especially in classic cars, as an example I always go to, in that, it doesn't matter when something was made. It's all that matters is how you enjoy it today. Now, of course, there are certain factors. Like if you hear a song at a certain time, every time you hear that song, it'll remind you of that time. But that song could have been written in 1950, 1999, yesterday, it doesn't really matter. And I truly think it's the same thing with video games. If you play something and you like it, awesome. If it has a nostalgic factor to you, that's cool too, but that doesn't have to do with when it was released. So to your point about Brazil, somebody in 2002 could have played Double Dragon for the Master System and gone, what a badass game. Bimmy and Jimmy were kicking ass on the way, And it's just, to them, that's their nostalgic experience. And, it doesn't matter how old they were or when Double Dragon was. So I truly think that that's why so many people care about retro games, because if it's a good game, it's a good game, period. Just like if it's a
Yeah.
good song, just like if it's a weird and unique car or an article of clothing or a piece of artwork. Like there's a reason the Met is still packed, even during lockdown times. If it was open, there's people in there, and it's for all these really awesome reasons.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about video games as a medium, I mean, if you want to go to the Louvre and you want to see, a lot of the paintings there, I mean, really, the interface is you take your eyeballs and you point them at the thing you're looking at. And I feel like with video games, one of the cool things is that, like, as the technology improves, the way that we enjoy this medium is improving too. Like, I always have the argument with people that I feel like in 2021, save states are an essential portion of enjoying retro video games on consoles. Just so many games, especially in North America, were not designed to be, what's the word that I'm thinking of? I mean, they were sort of designed around the rental market and making it as difficult as possible. So, like, having save states now makes so many games more accessible and more enjoyable than when they were released in, the late 80s or the early 90s. So that's, yeah, I think that, we've got so many things that separate video games from other mediums in terms of preservation and, like, reinterpretation.
Just in the broader preservation sense, there's a lot of talk. Like if you talk to anyone in digital preservation, whether it's film or music or whatever, they talk about accessibility as the major factor, right? You've dumped something to a pile of bits on a disk. That's great. Can you do something with that pile of bits on a disk? So yeah, they really do emphasize that it's, there's an elitism sometimes around the original way to consume media of any kind or any art form. But definitely, I think it's pointless unless people can actually enjoy it. And if that means emulators, if that means, misters, if that means something that's not the original hardware, that's still fine. Like as long as people can get to the thing. But that certainly doesn't stop people tinkering with hardware either. They're not incompatible concepts.
I think that brings up a really great thing that maybe ends up our next question, or maybe this is just stupid thought, but you could argue that there's no wrong way to experience art and music. Now, of course, there's always the side of people that's like, you've never been in a heavy metal mosh pit, you don't know what heavy metal is. I don't know about that. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of shows and played quite a few myself. And while it's a different experience, I also had a wonderful time as a kid with my headphones on, listening to all my old albums. And, Ronnie, I definitely want your input on this if you disagree. We got the pro musician here, but, when it comes to video games, there is a wrong way to experience some of these. You buy one of those knockoff cables with 1 million frames of lag that's, makes your image look wrong. And it's because...
Or the Hyperkin cube thing that came out recently.
And it's because the art and music are designed to be consumed, where video games are designed to be interacted with. So I guess that brings up, like, what would you classify as wrong way to play video games? I personally think software emulation's amazing. I just think that cheap scam hardware products are the wrong way, and sloppily thrown together software emulation.
My wrong way to me is if you're one is stretching it, I think is bad. Although one thing I do kind of consider is right is just expanding the aspect ratio out. Like when I first played Ape Escape on the PlayStation, I used Beetle PSX HW through RetroArch, and I turned on the perspective correct texture setting and the widescreen hack aspect ratio thing, which looks really nice. It stretches the HUD, but the rest of the 3D graphics are the right aspect ratio and the right shape and everything.
This is probably going to sound like a cop-out in terms of it, because I think it is really subjective. I'd say the only wrong way to experience retro video games is through a layer of abstraction that sort of doesn't contribute to the spirit of the medium. And I don't want to call out specific companies, but let's say, for instance, that you are enjoying a game from a piece of hardware that's running emulation code that's been appropriated from an open source project and sold without license. Again, I don't want to call out any specific companies. I think
because we have no idea who you're talking about here.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, most of the people who are developing software and hardware to enjoy retro video games are doing it in the spirit of trying to just make it more accessible. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And then there's people who are just doing it to make a quick buck and exploit everybody else. And I feel like that's the wrong way. There's certainly sort of shades and gradients of a more right way to do it, but I feel like the only wrong way to do it is when you're actively exploiting the community to make a quick buck, if that makes any sense. Hopefully I'm not making a cop out there.
It makes total sense to me.
I read a really interesting paper the other day, again on the digital preservation side, where someone's putting forward the idea that you've got archive.org and they've got emulators that run in your browser. So it's a WASM binary that actually executes through your browser. It's not like a remote desktop session or anything like that. You actually download the code, execute it in the browser.
Yeah.
And what that means is when you say you're a journalist and you publish an article, or you're a researcher and you publish an article, there's a really great opportunity now for people to embed save states in the article. So now, instead of a screenshot or instead of a video, you can actually say to people, here's this game that's running. Oh, and if you press play in this little box, you'll get that thing running at that exact point because I've embedded the save state, so you can see it for yourself and you can rewind and you can fast forward. So in terms of the documentation around video games, there's now this sort of more dynamic content that's available because of emulation, which is pretty cool.
And didn't Frank Cifaldi, maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but there was that SNK 40th anniversary
Yes, I was about to bring that up.
They had tool-assisted speed runs of each one of the games, and at any point you could stop the tool-assisted speed run and play from that point, right?
Yeah,
that's
it wasn't a task, but it was just a regular demo recording of a playthrough of the game that you could fast forward, rewind, play, pause, control that, but then you could also just hit a button and it'll just drop you in and you can play the game from that point.
And back to your comment before, Alex, you were talking about, accessibility of these old games. And it was a lot of these old games were designed, you had the arcade era where everything was intentionally difficult just to extract money out of you. And then you got into the home console era where these things were physically limited, right? You only had so much ROM space and so much processing power. So a lot of the games were just stretched out for no reason other than to stretch them out, right? I'm playing Final Fantasy 1 right now, and it is stretched. There's just no point to half that game. The story could be encapsulated in 15 minutes maybe, but the rest of it is just artificial padding. So I think the concept of save states and fast forwarding and all that kind of cool stuff that we get with tools these days really does, we're all short on time, we're all maybe a little bit short attention span these days, but I think that's kind of an interesting way to make old games less grindy, I guess.
I mean, after every last semester when I was just going through Gunstar Heroes again with a Blastem, after every level I would just do a save state just so I could close the emulator, do some college work, and pick the game up back later where I left off. That's how I use save states, just a bookmark.
Yeah.
Really.
All right, so I feel like we covered really good ground so far. We had a very interesting discussion about what is retro. We all got our first. Vanessa, did you tell your first console? Did I forget that already? I'm only one beer down.
That's okay.
Okay, we'll pass.
Technically my first console was the Atari 2600. My parents had them, and my uncle had a C64. So I got to dabble with those, and then in 88, I think I got a NES for Christmas, and went on there ever since.
Awesome. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss anybody because I know a lot of those are can turn into pretty cool stories, and it's something that people really identify with because, while we say these things out loud, we're also all picturing in our brains where we were when we got these first consoles and what it was like to take them apart and all that stuff. So that's always an important thing.
Absolutely, because just real quick to touch, I still feel like 2000 was yesterday. And 6th generation consoles, the Dreamcast, GameCube, OG Xbox, and PS2, like, I know other people consider those retro, but for me personally, it was such a graphical leap from the 64 and the PlayStation and Saturn up to those consoles that those games still feel modern to me. And it's still kind of hard to divorce that. That's 20, going on 20 plus years old now.
Yeah, so you brought up a point that I didn't know where the good place to inject this was, but thank you very much for leading us into this, and that there is one exception to that. So the first time I played a DC Digital, which and set it to 960p mode on my 4K TV, it had that mix of sharp and smooth scaling, and it felt like a PS3 game. So it was a Dreamcast. And you could say the same about some GameCube games as well. But PlayStation 2 is just that one console with a mostly 480i library where they used a lot of older techniques, a lot of the dither blending, a lot of the stuff that you really should play in composite video on a CRT. So I think that's one of the weird ones. What do you does anybody have any thoughts on the 480i stuff? And, do you have a preferred way? Is there any hardcore PS2 fans here that could speak to that?
I'm not a hardcore PS2 fan, but I will say whenever I want to play like MGS2 or MGS3, I just load up my Xbox One and play the HD versions.
Fair.
And they still look really good at like I guess it's 720p or those versions are. Like they still look really good in HD. Like they look almost like early 360 games at times, I'd say.
One of the things that I have to do with for most of my rhythm games on PS2 is actually just play it on CRT. Because while like stuff like the RetroTink doesn't have the lag, my TV still does, and especially audio because I have a sound bar, so the audio gets desynced.
Right, so you're not just battling the pretty constant but still lag of a flat panel. You're also dealing with the lag of the audio as well. So your brain, your hands, and your eyes, your ears have to. That's a good point. I keep forgetting about rhythm games. I'm gonna steal that one. I'll quote you, but I'm gonna steal that reference. One of the.
Yeah,
I bought a PlayStation
If you grab
2.
something like Space Channel 5 is unplayable on.
Yeah, I was.
Oh god, yeah.
That is super hard.
Actually, Space Channel 5 Part 2, the HD version is pretty good. I played on the PC version, like since that's mostly sound, display lag doesn't matter. Unless you have sound lag in your setup, then that's a problem.
I bought a PlayStation 2.
Tight on that game too. Timing on Space Channel 5 is so tight on top of.
The first one especially is pretty strict. I found. Like I played that one through a Dreamcast emulator, and like I had a stupidly hard time with that.
Or Samba de Amigo.
Yeah, that's another one. Just to jump on real quick on the Dreamcast, I played I played on my Shield to the Redream emulator, and with the widescreen hacks and raising the resolution, man, the Dreamcast still looks amazing. I played Sword of Berserk on the widescreen patch, and it looked almost like a real PS3 game. I was amazed. I couldn't believe how such an early game for that console could look so good, upscaled correctly.
You should do a video on that, Ray.
Once I get my setup back up to normal, it's been crazy since the C virus hit.
freaking Wii games look really good on Dolphin at like 4K at times, especially if you get a good like AI upscaled HD texture pack on top of it that makes the textures clean for those resolutions.
I first bought a PlayStation 2, not at all for modern games. Like it just had a huge volume of particularly Japanese arcade games that MAME didn't emulate, right? So you had Metal Slug 6, you had Hokuto no Ken, you had all the Guilty Gears, you had like all this really cool stuff that you just couldn't get any other way. And the PS2 home ports were really brilliant. So like I bought one just for that stuff. I don't think I played a 3D game on a PS2 for like, I don't know, probably until the PS2 was dead, really, and then I rediscovered the whole back catalogue. But yeah, I bought one, and the first thing I did was shove it into an arcade machine. So that was like my early PS2 experience was all low lag CRT, mostly fighters, but definitely a few shmups as well.
I sort of wonder about the PlayStation 2 in terms of like its, because you think about something like the GameCube, and they have Swiss, which like thank God for Swiss. Like every GameCube game looks better when you turn off that vertical filter that's there. And I know that the PS2 has GSM, but it feels like the hit rate for 480p output is really low. I wonder if that's like a limitation of the console itself, or just that the community hasn't been able to get over a certain hurdle. Because I feel like out of any console that's ever been released, it would benefit the most from a kind of approach to just how the signals output, because it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Black Dog Tech / I don't know if it'll be a Pixel FX product, but just to see where the PS2 digital goes, because the PS1 digital has been such a marked improvement in video quality over the original analog signals. So
I'm just excited to be able to play something like Chrono Cross and being able to go back and forth from the menu and not have everything have to resync over and over and over again.
Speaking of like just PS2 like successors of PS1 mods, I'd honestly love to see a PS2 X station, just so that you could use PlayStation 1 dumps on the actual PS2 hardware, because apparently like the HD loader uses some like weird middle ground of like emulation for PS1 games.
Yeah, I've talked to people about this, and there's a few hurdles, but hopefully somebody's going to start working on it, because when I first brought this up, the people who make these response was, "That's dumb. Why would you need that? Just use, Open PS2 Loader." I'm like, that's really complicated. You're forgetting that a lot of people want to hand their consoles to a modder and say, "Please do this for me. Even if I have the skills to do it, I don't have the time. You're better than me anyway. You do this. I'm going to come home and I want to put my ISOs on a USB stick and plug it in, and I don't want to deal with anything else." So hopefully they're listening, because I really do think that one would be a pretty big seller.
And in the case of my setup, especially, like, I don't have that much room. If I could, I would love to consolidate both my PS2 and PS1 into just a PS2. That's like, because I don't have the space for it. Like, if it's slim only, okay, I'll buy a slim for that mod. I've got a fat currently, but I'll buy a slim for it. Just, I would love to have an X Station PS2.
My problem with the PS2 is kind of trivial. I find it to be a bit too sharp on my PVM using the HD Retrovision component cables. So I plugged it in a consumer grade JVC TV through S-Video, and it looked much better to me. I've always had this kind of problem with being a bit too sharp. I mean, give me back this dithering effect. I love it. It feels like it's so unique to the system. There's no other system like it.
I completely agree, and I very often recommend people especially if you have a PS2 and a composite video cable already, grab any CRT off the side of the road. You can find them all the time in New York here. Plug it in and just try it, because most people agree in that's exactly how the developers at the time wanted those games to look. They're using all of the imperfections to make the game almost look higher resolution. And then as soon as my favorite example is the bubble in Nights into Dreams from Saturn.
Yeah.
Because if you play that in RGB, the whole game looks beautiful, but there's all these dots everywhere. And it's just, you play it in composite, now there's a transparent bubble, and that's a great point.
One thing I love about Saturn emulation was I played the Saturn version of Nights into Dreams for the My Life in Gaming Game Club, and I decided to do the Saturn version because I played the HD version on PC before in the past. And when you raise the internal resolution of a Saturn game, the dithered pixels become smaller and smaller because they're just 1 pixel in the up-res resolution. So the transparency has a slight texture to it, but it still looks like a transparent ball, essentially.
Now, Bob, real quick with Nights in a Dream on the Saturn, were you trying it in the anamorphic widescreen? Because it does have that
Yeah.
option.
That's
for
pretty
it.
good too.
I've tried both, and the bubble point stands in both modes. But yeah, the widescreen stuff's interesting because
Yeah.
if you have a display that supports it, like somebody here I know for a fact does, Vanessa,
Or an
and,
emulator.
Actually, Dan's got one too, literally right behind him. But point being, if you have a widescreen CRT, I know that you actually have. If you do that kind of widescreen, you're losing a little bit of detail because it's the same amount of pixels being stretched across. But I do appreciate, like the point Chris made before, as long as you're not stretching the image, I do really appreciate all of that extra detail. And I wonder how that would affect it because it's the same theory in that there's less detail in the same space. So I wonder if that would make it feel more transparent. So composite
Only
video
the-
Saturn widescreen on the BVM or something.
One thing I actually wonder is if those dithered pixels would become rectangles, or like just instead of like just squares, like depending on the resolution, if they just be wider pixels. If
Yeah.
if it's dithered.
Depends on the game. Like, I play a lot of GameCube games through my Wii via Nintendo, and they've got you can force 16:9 and aspect correct and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, you definitely see those non-square pixels creep in, but you're less sensitive to it. The human brain's is more sensitive to vertical resolution than horizontal resolution.
Yeah, I heard that talk when it comes to like modern games with dynamic resolution scales, like horizontal resolutions are less noticeable.
Yep, and that's why like the Super Nintendo's almost it's what 8:7 or something, like a really odd square resolution that they blow out because it saved a lot of memory and processing, and nobody really notices.
As long as
for his
there's no
controversial-
shimmering.
Yeah.
I feel like we need Mark from My Life in Gaming to pop out of nowhere and just be like shimmering.
Shimmering.
Like the Mortal Kombat toasty, but
Exactly.
For as controversial as Zach or Voltar can be sometimes, I think one of the things he really nailed is that, a lot of us think of like RGB or component as like the superior signal, but I think that each one of the connection types is kind of its own aesthetic. And I know for me personally, jumping between component, HD Retrovision, or RGB to composite on my PVM, they're very different looks. And I feel like maybe somebody's doing it and I just don't know, but is somebody making like high quality composite video cables for retro consoles? Because I feel like I definitely have the retro gaming cables made that one N64S video cable that was really good. But is anybody out there making properly spec'd, well-made composite video cables for retro gaming consoles?
So the answer to that is actually interesting in that because the inherence of composite video is already noisy, the difference between mostly, I'm oversimplifying here. I know there's going to be somebody in the comments that's like, actually, but the main difference in all of this is that when you have a really good shielded composite and stereo audio cable versus a junk one, the main difference then becomes in the audio because the interference between the lines starts to hit. You get a hum or a buzz, especially like the Konami logo, right? When it gets all white and then back, that's when you get that really loud buzz coming through. So I don't know if there's anybody trying to make really good composite cables, but I think for anybody out there who appreciates audio, that absolutely is something that we would like. But to your point, I have a very, very strong opinion about signals. When it comes to playing on CRT, anything is awesome. They all have their own advantages and disadvantages, whether it's a PS1, but you're talking about sharpness versus blending or anything else, they're all good. But when you start scaling this stuff on a flat panel, scale all of the interference as well as the signal. So RF through a VCR into a composite video scaler to a 4K TV is going to look terrible Whereas RF into a CRT, if you're not in the middle of Manhattan, is going to look pretty much like composite, and you're going to have a great signal. That's actually something I'm trying to add to one of my videos, is how RF looks in Manhattan in my apartment versus how it looks when I just like it, just outside of the city when there's not thousands of wireless networks around. But that's pretty much it.
One thing I'm going to say though about that though, one time I actually loaded up my Dreamcast with the composite cable because that's the only video connection I have for my Dreamcast, through my OSSC with the Koryu, and at 5x it surprisingly looked really good. There was some dot crawl, but that's all I noticed in terms of imperfections in the picture. It looked pretty good.
Anybody here with a RetroTink 2X Pro, have you tried out the low frequency mode on like the component video input that's supposed to simulate kind of the composite video look? Can anyone comment on that? Because I don't have a 2X Pro, so I haven't tried it yet.
I'm laughing. I'm laughing not because of your question, but because I do so many of these videos where I take footage. I asked Mike as a favor if he could make me a special firmware that doesn't have it, so I don't accidentally capture footage in that mode when I'm looking at like a little preview window. So I run a custom version of the Tink firmware. So if anybody else could answer that, please.
You should have a second Tink that's stock without that firmwulfirmware.
Yeah, I got like 10 of them, and they're all on the custom firmware. But sorry, that made me laugh.
Sorry,
I actually did cover it in my last RetroTink 2XM video. So there's actually a couple of examples in there. It's not super long or anything, but it gives you an idea of how it works, and it works very well, at least on the Genesis, which is where I tried it. But the Mega Drive, for anybody who's not in the US.
Yeah, and I feel like for the Genesis, that'd probably be the best use for it, because I don't know about anybody else. I've been having a hell of a time finding good Genesis mini DIN cables that have the proper audio wiring. Like any of the stores around me that stock those cables, or even console5.com, it's like the audio is using that out-of-date spec that HD Retrovision updated their documentation for ages ago. So it's been hard to find good Genesis cables, and having like a composite video mode for the RetroTink that uses HD Retrovision cables would be kind of ideal for me.
But it's nearly impossible now, because the cables that are out now, most of them have the stereo reverse as well. So it's like you have junky video, reverse stereo.
At least with the stereo reversal, that's a simple solution for most people. You just swap the cables.
It is, but it's plug them into the opposite. But especially when anybody that works with this stuff as part of their content creation, it's like you grab a cable, you plug it in. There was one I was so freaking mad. I was testing. I forgot which mod I was testing, but audio wasn't working, or I was getting a buzz out of one channel, and I freaked out. I'm like, I know I'm not the best at this stuff, but I definitely wouldn't have made this mistake. This is horrible. What did I do? And then I realized it was the cable, some junky. It was brand new, still sealed. I took scissors and I cut it in a million pieces and threw it out. I was like, I don't ever want to make this mistake again. Screw this cable. And I don't want to put him on the spot, but Ryan from Castlemania did talk about at least looking into getting quality composite cables for this exact reason. So, if you find a CRT, whether it's on the side of the street or your old one, and you hook up your classic consoles, there's no reason why you have to listen to a loud buzz on your audio, or even have to worry about reversing the audio channels. There should be some basic ass shit that people get right. So I don't know how far he got with it, but he was putting some serious effort into getting decent.
Well, and I don't want to throw him under the bus either, but I think, God, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. Tianfeng? Am I getting that right? Did I fuck that up?
Tianfeng, but I pronounce it differently every time I say it, just because he's my friend and we fuck with each other.
Okay, he's a great dude. Sorry, I want to give him more respect than pronouncing his name wrong. I feel bad, but I feel like he was looking into something about good Genesis composite video cables as well. So hopefully, we can get some good composite video back, and there'll be an abundance of different options for people enjoying retro games.
Yeah, one of the other projects we're looking at too is circling back all the way around from where RetroRGB started, and that a lot of the console mods that we promote and love end up accidentally, as a side effect, disabling composite video. And my biggest fear of that by far is that somebody will have the console now, understand that, not care because they're not using composite anyway, and whoever gets that console next plug in a composite video cable and go, it's not working, console's dead, throw it out. So, it's not just it being able to experience it with Composite. It's that whole, we all have to wonder about who gets our consoles next. And that's not even a depressing thing. It's just one of those, like, it's life. You want to pass these things on to other people when you're done with them. So we are working on a few things where it's getting 99% as good of an RGB output while still retaining every feature. And the only one that I think the only one that we worked on, there was a PS2 mod that kept Composite and deleted S video so that you could get C-Sync, but I kind of feel like that one's okay because you're either going to go, RGB or Composite with PS2, but who knows? With all the new stuff coming out now, that might not even be a thing. But yeah, we're absolutely on that, and it's something I think it's important to a lot more people normally hear about.
And
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
a good
quite. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's a good point, and then almost makes me want to like label on the back of my consoles like RGB only.
I do. I put. I don't know. I think I still have it right here. A while back, somebody gave some Heiko sticky notes. So obviously, paper is non-conductive. So I'll just handwrite, "This is an RGB mod." Like, go to, and I'll put these on the inside of my consoles, which I forget that I do it. So sometimes I'll unbolt the console, and this piece of paper will fall out, and I'll be like, "What the hell is that?" Oh, okay. But that's
that makes you stuff like that is kind of part of the reason why I'm kind of tempted to get one of those. My job has them for like just the name tags. And it's like I'm tempted to get one and just say like,
yeah, Ray,
RGB only and so on.
Now we're talking.
I'm trying to find the Casio one.
The label maker gang has shown up.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm lucky my apartment's so small that all of my things are right here within arm shots. I got my retro takes that I pulled out before. I got my labeler. Stand here and do everything that I need.
Yeah, this has turned into the RetroRGB Label Makers podcast. So
I guess I gotta go then. Bye.
No, it's a lifesaver for N64 and Jaguar carts at minimum.
Yeah.
I'd probably just
those things, right?
I'd probably just get one.
I wish Smoke Monster was here because he's got one of those. Used them in the late '80s that had the little stamp, and like you rotated the dial, and like every time you stamped the letter into the tape, it moved the tape, and then you changed the dial, and it was like red or blue or whatever color. Black I used. I remember my dad in the military had a ton of them, and
they use
used
those
those
at my job.
labels.
So use those at my job.
They just take forever. That's the only problem. We had one, but we chucked it out and got one of the modern ones. It just takes too long.
Yeah, sorry for the cut. This is the first time that we're using Discord to do this, and Chris and I discovered before that if somebody's signal blips out, I might have to refresh my screen, and when I do that, it kills everything. So there's probably going to be multiple cuts in this. But you know what? I think
maybe
by now
next time
we're all
Skype
used
might
to
be
it.
better.
Yeah, I mean, I would have hoped that the whole world by now would have been used to what it's like to do these things remotely. I still get comments on every interview video or live stream where people are like, "You're the worst host ever. You're talking over your guest." And it's like, my guest is 10,000 miles away. Like, what are you talking like? So
But
yeah,
you got people from the opposite end of the world here. What do you expect?
yeah, we are quite literally covering the globe with this conversation here. So the fact that it's as good as it is, I'm very appreciative of. And if we have to stop and refresh every few minutes, that's fine. I'm just, I'm glad that we're doing this one pre-recorded. That way we could kind of figure out the better way to do it live. Because I do think the next one should be live. I just, I would love to interact with people. I would love more than anything else to have people that follow all of your work ask you questions about cool stuff that you've done and your posts and your input on all of this. But we needed a good practice run. And this is exact proof as to why we needed a good practice run before doing that.
Maybe next time we should try Skype.
No, this has been solid.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah.
I tried Skype before. I think I like this better, actually.
My one problem though is that my one problem is that I don't know if this is happening to everyone else, but the bit rate on everyone's video is pretty low.
Gotta get better
you know.
internet.
You just got to
I'm not
drink
the
more,
one.
and then everyone's blurry. So
Well, I mean, I'm too young. I've just got Cheerwine here.
yeah, there we go.
This is just soda. This is like cherry soda.
Just imagine using a retro camera on a 56K connection. You know, it's retro RGB. Just
There you
Picture it
go.
that way.
I'm also the one not in charge of the house, so I can't get better internet.
Who's going to be the first RetroRGB member to stream a live Q&A with their Game Boy camera over a Super NT or something?
You know what? Or just
You know-
use a modern webcam. Use a modern webcam with the Game Boy emulator, and just use the Game Boy camera software with that.
It's really
It's
funny you say
possible.
that, Alex, but years ago, I built a rig for my cousin Scott, who wanted to make videos with that. So we built a portable rig with a SNES Mini that's RGB modded with the Game Boy player in it, and he hooked up a battery pack to it and everything, and that was his portable video camera. Because he also had what was the capture card that you could run without a computer, so it just goes
The
directly
Live Gamer
in.
portable.
Yes.
The AverMedia Live Gamer portable.
And then Furtek promised me like 3 years ago that he was gonna, because he already built one of those where you just put the Game Boy thing in and you could just walk around with it and it records on SD. He promised me he was gonna sell me one of those, and he's obviously been doing absolutely nothing productive since. So yeah, he clearly gets a pass. Clearly, I still
Vanessa,
want one, Furtek.
Vanessa, you said you had a thing, right? You wanted to follow up on something?
Yeah, we were talking about composite video, and it made me kind of think, what was everyone's kind of first experience, or that first, opposite of composite? What was your first like RGB, like, whoa, oh my God, this looks incredible. And I can't believe I've never seen video quality this sharp or this good looking before.
I've actually probably been the most recent with that. A few months ago, like sometime like fall last year, late 2020, I ordered a SCART cable for my Model 2 Genesis from Insurrection Industries. As soon as I got it, I plugged it into my OSSC and was like, holy cow, this looks amazing. Like, it was stock, so it still had the jail bars, but I didn't mind how that looked. It was still like really sharp. Freaking, oh, it was mind blowing.
I'll go next. I just got into TurboGrafx, so I hooked it up via RF, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then I had bought a DB Graphics booster, and I had my OSSC, and I had it on my big screen, and I'm like, how did they get any better? Oh my gosh. But yeah, that was, and I actually remember I still have pictures in my phone where I was taking pictures and sending it to like my mom and going, look how pretty this is. Look how pretty this is. She's like, you have a problem.
I was doing that on Discord with my Genesis. Like, I was taking close-up shots of my TV, and like my 43-inch TCL 4K TV, just like, guys, this looks freaking great. And it's like, it was on the Red Hot Sonic Discord. He's like, yes, we know, basically.
How about everybody else? This is a great question. I'm really interested to hear everybody's answer.
For me, it was in the early 2010s. A friend of mine here in Lebanon just found a bunch of arcade boards, a bunch of CPS1, CPS2, and just other random boards. And he was like, "Hey, you like arcade games? Why don't you just pick and choose and take it home?" I said, "Okay," and I picked a few arcade boards, probably 5 or 6 of them. And I went home and I said, "Okay, now how am I gonna hook this up?" So I looked everything up, and a super gun came up. So I ordered a super gun from France, and I totally forgot the name of the company that
Retro
was
Electric.
selling it. Yeah, probably that's the one. And so when it arrived, there was this SCART connection. I was like, "What the hell is that? I haven't seen that since VCR days." So the same guy who gave me the arcade board said he found a very old shop that still has CRTs, still selling CRTs, and has brand new CRTs with SCART input. So I went there and I picked up my first Grundig CRT back in 2012. And the minute I got it home, I had a PC Engine interface, an RGB modded PC Engine interface. That's probably was modded by Douche and Dance?
Yeah.
Douche and Dance. So
That's the one.
Yeah, so I hooked that up and I was blown away. Whoa, okay, now I really need to find what this RGB is all about. And a couple of years later, I stumbled stumbled upon RetroRGB.com. So yeah, that was it for me. It started with a super gun.
Awesome.
An amazing start, though.
Yeah. Like another, actually, going back to my situation, later on I found a VGA CRT in the basement. And so like I decided to get that up, get an adapter, hook that into my OSSC, run my Genesis at 480p with the scan lines on. And that also looked freaking great. Like the fake scan lines made it look really nice.
I think the one that blew me away was the Genesis, because the Genesis mostly shipped with RF. You know, I don't even know if the later models came with a composite or not. But even the composite wasn't that great. So when the HD Retrovision cables came out, and I plugged that thing in, it was like, wow, man, we really got screwed over in the US.
Ray, I know you have a
Thanks.
bunch of CRTs with component video input, but was your first RGB that, or was it through a scaler, or?
It was through a scaler.
Okay.
It was one of those, you know, cheap converter boxes, SCART to, you know, component,
No.
those type of things. The infamous SCART to HDMI, you know, all that stuff. But you know, even growing up, you know, I didn't since RGB wasn't really a thing. I always had S video from the minute it came out. So my original Super Nintendo had S video, and I played that way. Same thing with my PS1 and everything else. And then, of course, when the Dreamcast came out, hooked it up to VGA, and that blew me away. Of course.
Alex, how about you?
Well, so at the risk of sounding like like a pain in the ass, I got GameCube component video cables when they were like $50 new from Nintendo Canada, like way back in the day. But that actually isn't where I got the best boost out of GameCube video quality. The greatest boost I ever got was recently this year when I installed the GC loader and I was finally able to start running Swiss for the first time. And you know, just like the Vaseline got taken off the screen and finally GameCube games looked like I thought they should look. Because I used to compare Ikaruga between Dreamcast and GameCube and think like, why is the GameCube so much softer? Why does my TV, you know, it must be the component video versus versus a VGA thing. But no, just like running it through Swiss and being able to take off the vertical filter is just like completely game changing. You know, like Extrems and God, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. Emu Kidded.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, the work that they've done with Swiss is just like unreal in terms of how it improves that system. And it's all software based. Like being able to improve video quality that much through just like a soft mod is just, you know, so unbelievable.
Sort of stuff's really pervasive too, right? Like there's a long running sort of internet, you know, wives' tale, I guess, that Ikaruga on GameCube was inferior because there were texture issues or whatever, and it's just this softening that goes on.
And actually, speaking of just the softening thing, like I'm guessing that was the flicker filter. It reminds me of how Smash Bros. Brawl on the Wii in the game settings actually lets you turn on or off the flicker filter depending on what you preferred.
That's actually I don't know if the Wii version does. I know for sure the GameCube version lets you toggle that.
Brawl on the Wii lets you toggle the flicker filter. Yeah. I remember doing that.
And just like to just go over again how big of a boon the like Swiss on GameCube is, the thing that it does where it patches a doll, and forgive me if I'm, you know, saying the technical stuff wrong, but you can do that on a Wii, but you actually have to extract the doll files from each game and using like a hex editor patch out like the different VI filters. So just being able to use Swiss to have it happen automatically, it took me like 2 days to patch all my Wii disc rips to make sure that they were using a version of the doll that didn't have that filter in, and now they look better. But holy crow, that's so much work! I can't wait until something equivalent to Swiss on the Wii.
I'm surprised Swiss hasn't been ported to being something like on the Wii, or just having its features integrated into something like Nintendo.
Apparently, and again, we'll have to talk to Extrems about this. I'm sure he'll have opinions, but there is like some Swiss that supports like the Wii optical drive emulator that got released like ages ago. But because of the way that like Wii software loads and works, it's not quite as simple as just porting Swiss over wholesale. There's a whole bunch of other stuff because I think there's like a hypervisor that runs, and that makes things complicated. But again, I'm just a layman, so there's a lot I don't know about it.
Yeah.
Well, we got two more, and I'm really interested in the answers because I'm half expecting Vanessa to be like, well, my first RGB was with a D24, so all of you could fuck right off.
Oops.
And Dan probably, well, I bought it, we rebuilt an arcade machine when I was 9, and now, so either one of you got to go because I can't wait to hear your stories in this.
After you, Vanessa.
Yeah, but what about Bob?
Were you just waiting this entire time to say that?
I mean, I heard
That's not the first time I've used that. No,
I heard. I was gonna say I heard he deinterlaces fast at least.
No,
Well, there's joke in the book.
My first RGB. I mean, it depends. Like if you want to say component or not. I remember my TV that I had predominantly through the 90s, up until 2000, was just RF. So I had to use RF from NES, Genesis, SNES, all the way up because that was the only input that it had. But we lived out, in the suburbs, so I didn't, at the time, I never perceived it as a poor video quality. That was just what I used.
Yeah.
And when I would go over to other people's house, other families, their setups, it was predominantly RF. So I didn't really kind of experience anything really other than RF until in 2000, well, not counting the PC side. In 94, I got my 46, and that was obviously a difference between PC side of thing and consoles. But in 2000, I got this really nice Toshiba 27-inch TV for Christmas. It had 2 component hookups in the back, and S-Video. And not long after, I started working for FuncoLand. And one of my friends at the time was from the UK and would always talk about SCART and RGB and this and that, and how much better the Amiga looked with SCART and everything. I'm like, yeah. And I start looking into this and I'm like, well, my TV has component. And I started researching signals and everything, and just happening to be where I was working at, we would have Monster branded cables traded in, but there was no SKU for it, so it was just $2.99 to purchase it. So, I got Monster branded cables for everything. And then I turn around like, well, what's the next best thing from component cables? And well, S-Video. So then I went back and got S-Video for the Saturn and some of the older consoles, the Dreamcast, because I was primarily using it on my TV, not on a CRT, but I did have a VGA for it. And so I was experiencing that, and I had, that cool Pelican manual system selector that you could put in all the labels for each console, and I had everything hooked up via component that I could. I ordered the GameCube component cables the day that it was put up on Nintendo's site because I had to have it for Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. And so I had component for everything. I was like, yeah, this looks amazing. And then, gosh, what was it now? 6 years? When did you start, Bob? It was like you and Phone
10
Dork.
years ago.
Yeah, it's like I remember looking at your content, looking at Phone Dork, and I cannot remember what it was in, but I saw an image of the FrameMeister and comparing RGB from the FrameMeister compared to like Composite or RF. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I started watching or listening, because really I was listening to you, Bob, back in the day. And then watching Phone Dork, and Phone Dork's like, yeah, D24, E1WU, and look at this. And it's like, I've got to get that. And then when I got it and, started running, because I was running JP21, I mean, SCART JP21, but that first moment getting into A Link to the Past or Super Metroid, that first, you boot up Super Metroid and that, Metroid 3, and then it starts scrolling across and you see the blue and the baby Metroid and the dead bodies on the floor, and it's like, oh my God. It was unbelievable. And from that point on, it's like, how did I miss this? How did I miss, the going from CRTs, and I do agree, composite on a CRT looks fine. S-Video, in my opinion, going to S-Video on a CRT still looks amazing. And if that's all you've got, I think that's a fantastic way to go, as long as you got a CRT. I know people love their panels, but I am very much a proponent of CRTs, and I probably will be until I die. And that going from that image quality, going from that timing, especially playing very poor emulators, getting in, the early 2000s, I think we all did this. We started playing emulators. I remember being off to college and would have my emulators on a thumb drive. I'd put it in, start playing Visual Boy Advanced or whatever. And not knowing any better, it's like, wow, am I getting older? Do I suck at these games? Like, why? Something's not right here. I'm playing Mega Man X and I'm like, I'm sucking and I'm failing. And I'm like, this is wrong. I remember being really good at this game. I remember being really good at Super Metroid. And then I started playing on the CRT again, and it's like, my God, I didn't suck. It's just, years and years of playing with no input latency, of no visual latency, just messed me up. Like, I could not play on an emulator. And so that aha moment, that, come into Jesus moment, if you will, playing on a CRT, glorious RGB, it was fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, you're talking to the people here that completely understand that story too. So, all right, you're up, Dan.
All right. Well, I guess like so many, I started on RF as we all did. Sega SC3000, Sega Master System were my first two consoles, and then after that was really lucky to have both a Mega Drive and a Super Nintendo, which was sort of a bit rare at the time to have two consoles in a household. But I used to read a lot of UK gaming magazines. They were sort of the primary. Like it wasn't until later we got the Game Pros and things from North America. Most of the stuff we got here was CVG and Mean Machines. Rich Ledbetter from Digital Foundry, he used to write for CVG back in the day. That's where he started out. So that's kind of like where I know Rich, and seeing him on Digital Foundry today is kind of cool. But they would always take these really awesome quality photos of their SCART output RGB games. That's how they took screenshots. So they had the little contraption that sat over the camera. They put it over their nice, decent quality TVs that they had there, usually like German brand TVs. So not the broadcast monitors that we're kind of used to today, but definitely high quality, like your $1,000 to $2,000 consumer home CRTs at the time, which were, what the video files would have. And they were, those sorts of brands, right? Louver and others like that too. So they would take those sorts of screenshots and put them in their magazines, and they were fantastic. You'd see those as a kid. I remember many years later seeing Super Mario World on Super Nintendo. They had an exclusive on that they traveled to Japan to take the photos, and it was just incredible seeing the quality that they got out of that. So that was sort of an eye-opener at home. It was like, well, mine look like crap. They don't look nearly this good. How come these look so great? And then it was sort of a progression on through the video standards to try and match that. So, you went out and you got components that have RF and you played with that for a bit, and then you got S-Video and you played with that for a bit. But yeah, it was, I guess, a combination of emulation and my arcade hobby that really made me aware of the big differences. So, my first intro to emulation was Nesticle on DOS, which I believe Modern Vintage Gamer did a video on a while back. And they also had what was it? There was Genesis and Catalyst, I think. So that was they came later though, but definitely Nesticle was like, okay, this is really sharp on my PC monitor. How come it doesn't look like this, the other way? And then once I got into the arcade collecting stuff, there was a website that popped up called Scart to Jammer, and they documented extracting RGB out of consoles, boosting the signals to get them to arcade voltages, and then sticking them into your arcade machine. So I went back and grabbed all my consoles. I got my Mega Drive, I got my PlayStation 1, I got all these consoles and started playing them on my arcade machines. And it was mostly the arcade ports that I was interested in. But yeah, definitely it was like night and day difference between, what I'm looking at on my consumer TV versus what I'm looking at on my RGB arcade monitor. And even then, through ignorance, I was like, well, maybe this is a special monitor. There's something. No, it's the same tube. Years later, arcade tube swaps and things like that came out. So it was all pretty evident that it was just the signal. So yeah, it was sort of a slow burn progression. There wasn't like a night and day point where I was like, wow, this is different. But it was just like these incremental changes as time went on, and I got access to different hardware and could play around with it.
That's awesome. I remember mine. It's actually fitting that I'm going last because it's short and on the nose. But I remember being, for all of my fellow Bridgeport people, there's actually a lot of us out there, RGT85, Rourke, we didn't know each other, but we all grew up in the same weird ghetto. Trumbull Mall in the 90s. I showed up in an electronics boutique. I just was talking to the guy behind the counter. I was like, wow, Sonic looks great. And he's like, yeah, you got to play it on an RGB monitor. And I'm like, I have one of those because Candy 1000, it wasn't a VGA monitor. It wasn't technically an RGB monitor, 15 kilohertz signal. And he's like, oh yeah, you should definitely get it hooked up to that. So, in hindsight, of course, I would have never been able to download a pinout and be able to extract it. But I went around the corner to Radio Shack and was like, hey, I want to hook up my console to an RGB monitor. How do I have to do that? And this 1,000-year-old man walks up and he's like, well, if you read these 3 books, you could build your own signal. And I'm just like, man, that's not how you capture a kid's attention at all. I was like 12 or something. It's just like, look, what do I need to do? Do I need to build something? Do I need to? And the guy had no clue what he was talking about at all. He just wanted to sell me some books. So I kind of put it in the back of my mind. And then fast forward a million years later, playing stuff on the Wii Virtual Console. Like, it's good, but not the same without at least the controller. And then I'm playing it on my flat panel going, it's good, but what else is wrong? And I didn't realize it was lag and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's when I took an old CRT, hooked up a bunch of old consoles, thought, this is great, but what's that RGB thing that guy at Electronics Boutique told me 25 years ago or whatever it was? And, there you go. Then RetroRGB was born from that. So kind of a funny and weird but true story. So there you go.
One thing I'm gonna say is, on the note of the Virtual Console, rest in peace. That was actually my introduction to to retro games as a whole. Like, my first Mario game was the Virtual Console release of the original Super Mario Bros.
Yeah, that's a very valuable tool to preserve old games.
Yeah.
So I think, does anybody else have anything they want to talk about, anything they want to add? Because I think this was a really awesome first, bigger scale. As the website and everything else grows, there's more of us working on it, but it was everything I hoped it would be. Anybody else have anything to add or, anything they want to chime in on?
Well, I think what might be interesting to talk about as we sign off is there anything that you're really excited about in the retro gaming community coming up? Or, is there anything that you're sort of being hopeful for?
I'm not allowed to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm sure you're under NDA and you've got a couple of agreements, Bob. But personally, one of the things I'm excited about is, nice.
At first I was gonna say that bottom case needed retro brighting, but then you turned it around.
But yeah, I'm really excited about the Pixel X or FX N64 mod. I'm an Ultra HDMI owner, and I'm really excited about this new one because like being able to scale at arbitrary values and being able to have HQ2X smoothing and some of the other cool features that it feels like Dan and Woozle and Christoph are implementing are just like right up my alley. I can't wait to see N64 games on a big screen like this, even in all their soft blurriness. You know, I feel like there's going to be it'll just be really cool.
Honestly, one thing that I would like, one thing I'm hopeful for is just better Saturn emulation, because I saw that there was someone working on a Mister, or at least some kind of FPGA core for the Saturn, and I hope that work gets transplanted back into software emulation, just so we could have actual viable good Saturn emulation. Another thing that I would just want to see, like spitballing an idea here, is more of a more retro emulators that allow you to just see some of these old school games in VR. Because that's my current obsession, VR. And yeah.
Dan, I think we're going alphabetical this time, so there you go. Up to you.
All right, my turn, I guess. A couple of things I'm really excited for. Like I love all the console modding and stuff that's going on. I think that's really great for keeping old hardware alive. But I'm definitely, my hobby is more and more towards the longer term preservation. Like where does this stuff sit in 50 years, 100 years? Can people of that era accurately play and enjoy and experience the things that we're all taking for granted today? So that preservation side of things is what I'm trying to work on. There's a group here in Australia called Play It Again. They're run out of, I think, Melbourne Uni. 3 really fantastic women who run that project, more from a humanities arts side of things. They're looking at trying to build, similar to what archive.org do with emulators in a browser, trying to make that sort of interactive museum type experience. But also, COVID has really made them aware that they need to put it online and they need to make that accessibility higher. It can't be something that you've got to travel halfway across the country to get to. So I'm just, as a volunteer effort, trying to help those guys. I'm wherever I can pick up games, because they're really big on ripping the games for themselves to do the full verification process. So running around trying to find physical copies of things and shipping it down to them, but also helping them with emulator and the browser stuff, which I do on my site with the SC3000 stuff as well. So that's all stuff I'm really excited for. And then personally, Mister is just blowing my mind. I've been on that bandwagon for for a while now. And I love it. I'm really excited for the Saturn and PlayStation stuff that's coming out. I think that's going to be huge. I really hope that stuff takes off, because again, I think preserving that stuff now and having options now is even more critical, because we've got both. We can objectively compare a real bit of hardware to a emulated bit of stuff, and we have the tools now like MD Fourier and those sorts of things where we can do those comparisons, and then one day when all the consoles are dead, we know that we did a good enough job now so that stuff's preserved longer. And then similarly, I guess we were talking about composite and how that's its own aesthetic, and that's a real thing. Same sort of question, right? Like, what do people who don't have CRTs in 100 or 200 years do to verify that they're looking at something that the same thing that we saw when they look at, the Sonic Waterfall or whatever. So I'm pretty excited. There's a couple of folks working on some really interesting shaders, and they're targeting hypothetical, 8K, 240 frame per second screen kind of setups, where they're actually talking about emulating scan lines, like the actual beam that's running across, that they can do that in a shader. To actually emulate how a CRT works on a flat panel. So that's kind of mind-blowing that someone's thinking about that now. So they're things I'm really excited about.
That sounds friggin' amazing, actually. I'd love to see that.
Ronnie, you're up.
Yep. It's not something that's coming out soon. It's ever since Smoke Monster did that Mister series back in December 2019, I guess, I've been dying to get a Mister, to get a kit and assemble it and everything. But some terrible things happened in my country that's preventing me to import anything, actually. So hopefully one day everything clears out and I can get a Mister set up I've been watching the development of some cores and some of the new add-ons. It's so awesome.
It'll be worth the wait. I'll tell you that much.
Hmm.
I think awesome.
Ray, what do you think?
For me, it's the RetroTank 5X right now. I'm really excited about that. Mike's been teasing it, and it looks like
I don't
it's
know
gonna
what
be-
that is. That's not a product you could buy now, so I don't think we're allowed to talk about that. No, I'm kidding. Go right ahead. Go right ahead with your thoughts. Mike's already, the creator of it has already posted on Twitter, so it's obviously not a secret. I'm just being an asshole. I'm sorry, Ray.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think he's super excited about it, which is awesome. You know, I love seeing creators show genuine enthusiasm for their own products. He's definitely been doing that. So he showed me some stuff in the past, but seeing him post stuff about the 5X super excited about it.
Yeah.
In regards to the Mister, watching the CPS2 core get developed, awesome. You know, I loved a lot of CPS2 games growing up, and that's something that I'm super excited about. I can't wait to see that get finished. Nothing will ever be finished, but I'll get to a better place. Actually playing X-Men yesterday with Akuma, so that makes me happy. And the last thing is actually, I really like the fact that RetroArch has that disk project, and I hope to see more improvement on that. And I would like to see that scaled down to say maybe like the Raspberry Pis of the world, where people can, just build something real cheap and be able to play the disk-based games, with all the, safe states and all the emulated features.
Awesome.
Pretty much all the basic stuff I'm excited for.
Danielle, you're up.
So, RetroTink 5X. I have and love my OSSC, but I need another one. I mean, I have so many TVs and so many different flat panels and stuff like that I kind of do need a scaler at each one. But something that's hasn't really been talked about was like the re-releases of games on consoles or computers on physical media for stuff that's really old. So the new one, I just got the Iron Soldier 3 re-release for my new ones that are right there. Also, for the X68K, they just released the Yeez 1 and 2. Back on 5 1/4 inch floppies and stuff like that. That stuff to me is just so cool.
That is cool.
The re-release of stuff, and then also I'm still in like the Domesday Discord and just watching everybody talk about what they're actually going to be preserving. Because to me, I have a MSX Laserdisc player. I have the Laser Active, and I'd love to see all those things come up and, actually get preserved properly and playable on stuff like the Mister emulators.
All awesome points. Vanessa?
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I eagerly await any news of the X68000 core for the Mister, and how that's been coming along. I know, like Danielle, I've got my X68K Pro sitting over on display, but I haven't used it yet. It's there with my Turbo R, just kind of, there looking pretty. But for that, I really interested in using the Mister for a lot of those classic computers, especially they have a lot of things that you have to do to they're finicky, and the Mister just kind of really makes that super easy. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to, my Cheese 5X. But I'm also looking forward to the OSSC Pro because, when that finally comes along, there's going to be possible, because it's the same hardware, Mister implications with that too. So the idea of possibly having another Mister in addition to the Mister that I have, and then, the 5X for that is really super exciting. And so there's a lot of cool things coming along. I was showing my original SNES and how it's been busted after 14, 15 moves over the years. And we got that clear case coming out. So I'm happy that we've got all these kind of projects coming along with case replacements and different types of controllers and everything for original hardware, or just replacement of cool things. There's still decent products out there. Sometimes there's some pretty crappy controllers. Sometimes you can kind of maybe finagle them, maybe adjust them a bit. I know Spawnwave was showing off the new wireless Game Boy Player controller, and one of the things he did was he took the D-pad and the sponges and everything out of a broken SNES controller and put it in, and found much more success with that. So there's a lot of excitement with various things for various products that we have coming along, and I feel like every year there's just been someone has come up with more ideas. Like, it's just kind of snowballed into, we used to just have the FrameMeister. Now we have the OSSC. Now we have, all of Mike Cheese products. And looking at different areas, it's the same. It's like, now we have more controllers. We had one type of aftermarket case. Now we have all these other aftermarket cases. And it just seems like the momentum of the retro vintage gaming community is picking up, and other people are adding to it. And it's really exciting to be a part of that.
I couldn't agree more. And I gotta say, all kidding aside, I'm so grateful to be even the smallest little part of so many amazing projects that I'm genuinely excited about. From something you could plug into a monitor that fixes sync that 7 people in the world are going to be excited about and nobody else will give a shit about, versus amazing global projects like Mister and new scalers coming out. There's just so many amazing things that I'm grateful to be a part of, and I am always genuinely grateful to be hanging out with all of you amazing people. And I'm not saying that because I'm on the podcast with you. I'm not a very nice person. I would, if I had a bad thing to say, I would have already said it. But in all honesty, I mean, Dan and I first met because he criticized one of my shitty opinions in the comments, but he wasn't a douche about it. He was a respectful human. And next thing you know, we're buddies, and he's teaching me shit all the time. I get Danielle's been helping out for years now behind the scenes. I remember getting a random email from Ronnie who seemed pretty cool until he sent me a picture of him on stage at like a big festival playing a metal show, and now suddenly he's really cool. And I was paying a lot more attention to his emails. I mean, Ray Commend shows up at my office one time in Brooklyn when I had one of those. I hung out with Vanessa. Like, all of you people are amazing. Alex and Chris, I've just gotten to know you recently, but you're pretty freaking cool too, which is why you're here. So I
Thank
think
you.
this is not only my thanks to all of you, but this little rant I'm going on here is also just a reflection on how many amazing people are in this community that just want to spread the love of all this stuff. And it's so easy to get sucked into the trolls because the loudest voice, usually the one heard most, but people like all of you are the ones that keep this going and are really the majority. People that just, I love this stuff. I want to share this stuff with other people. So I think, this was an awesome podcast. I had such an amazing time doing it. Next time we got to do it live. We definitely needed to go through this learning process because, we are in so many different time zones. We're across 3 different countries in Canada. It's a sorry, kidding.
Canada.
Kidding.
I mean, hey, Canada's just an apartment that's on top of a great big party.
That's for all my friends up there. Every one of them is laughing at that one. Everybody else is like, "Oh my god, was that just racist?" No, all my Canadian friends are laughing at that one. So, yeah. Honestly, though, all kidding aside, you're all very awesome people. I'm so grateful to be working with all of you. So we're definitely going to do these more often. And we have to just figure out the correct time to do it, because I believe Dan had to get up at 5:30. It's probably pushing midnight for Ronnie, so we got to just rotate these around so we're all we're all doing this more often. But I think while I like doing the general chats like this, maybe next time a good debate comes up, something positive and happy, like what's considered retro, stuff like that. We should just jump on these and just do it, just pull the trigger on it and just get that out there, because I love hearing everybody's opinions on it. Thank you all very much for being a part of this.
Can I say one thing actually that I found really cool? I was on a stream yesterday at the time of recording this with Alexander Mejia, where he was playing Metroid 2 and the AM2R remake, and he mentioned how my post about the widescreen Super Mario World hack actually appeared on his Google News feed.
That's
which
awesome.
to me was insane to hear and friggin' cool. And I wish he screenshotted that and showed me.
That's pretty
But it's
awesome.
like
Yeah, we hung out with Alex, Vanessa, and I out in Portland. Hopefully, when the world opens up again, we could do all of that stuff.
Yeah, hopefully I can meet him in person as well, because we hit it off. We both freaking cool. I yell at him, he yells at me. I call him a Dolby shill.
And Dan, I've been threatening to invade your island for a long time now, so it's definitely going to happen once all of this stuff.
You're very welcome. I've got the whole thing planned out. It'll be awesome. There's a lot of beer. A lot of beer.
Well, all of you hang on a moment, but we'll say goodbye for now, and we'll definitely do another one much sooner than the last one.